Jai Ram Om. Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram Om. Om Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram. Hari Om to everybody. Pranam, pranam, pranam. Pranam, pranam. For a change, we will try to deep into Papa's period of struggle. Because on the 16th of this month, Papa's Jayanti comes. Like any other day, there is also a day. But normally our practice is to intensely dwell upon some facets of his inspiring life. As we are now going through In Quest of God, it is definitely instrumental in touching various aspects of Papa's life. Still, we thought, for the next 2-3 days, we will try to understand the mental transition of Vitthal Rao to Swami Ramdas. Because normally the general practice is, when we go and meet a saint, get inspired by his towering personality and his words of wisdom, and then we start associating ourselves with the saint's thoughts, life. But unknowingly, we start from where they have ended. With the result, our association with the saint stays at the intellectual level. Suppose we try to travel with him right from the moment of a sadhaka, then to the Siddha Purusha. It might make a lot of difference. So when we go to the bhajan hall or anywhere in ashram, we will see the photographs of Papa. It is inspiring. To that form we have developed a liking, an attachment. But that doesn't give us any idea about the struggle he had. So suppose we associate ourselves with the struggle, and which was instrumental for him to move from the ordinary person, ordinary devotee stage or a sadhaka stage into a realized saint, the impact of it will be definitely far, far better than the other one. So we have heard about Papa, we read Papa's works. For anything and everything, we have got PPTs, everything, what Papa said. From so many books we can quote. But still we are finding it difficult, as to how to fix our mind on the nameless, formless, indwelling, all-pervading reality. So now Papa is guiding us from within. Go to the period where he had the struggle. Because that when we go through the period of struggle, something of it will remain with us. Because most of us are also going through various struggles. There might be some similarities. So we are, luckily, there are many episodes in Papa's life which have not been touched by him. So Chandrasekhar Rao, his son-in-law, at the request of devotees, took up the initiative of writing a beautiful book under the title Passage to Divinity. It has been beautifully coined, Passage to Divinity. So some portions we will try to read. Struggle, Providence to the rescue. On the one hand, the financial condition of the business concerned. He started a business called Sitaram Vitthal Rao Company. Sitaram Vitthal Rao Vitthal Company. Sri Sitaram Vitthal Co. So it had a lot of ups and downs. Initially, it was doing very well. The newly opened business was conducted on a pretty large scale, both in dyed and printed sarees and in the sale of dyes. Vitthal Rao attended to the workshop at home, while Narsingh Rao attended to the shop in the town. Later, Vitthal Rao's eldest brother Narsingh Rao also joined the business as a partner. Vitthal Rao put his heart and soul into the work and would personally lead his workmen in carrying out the different processes of dyeing fabrics. It was a familiar sight in those days to see Vitthal Rao with his shirt and dhoti besplashed with all sorts of colors. The products of Sri Sitaram Vitthal Company were highly appreciated by the public and even won a gold medal at one of the exhibitions at Bangalore. But Vitthal Rao was too good to be a businessman. The wages that he paid his workmen were higher than what similar work would have earned for them elsewhere. Increments to the staff were frequent and were fixed without any thought of the financial condition of the company. The scale started tilting dangerously towards the debit side. The expenses became heavy, and whatever profits were made, they were swallowed by the day-to-day overhead expenses. There was no capital to back up the concern. Still less any reserve funds to fall back upon in times of emergencies. The company was rushing headlong towards disaster. In course of time, his two partners also left the business one after the other, as the state of affairs was neither bright nor hopeful. Such a precarious condition would have well-nigh crushed anyone, but it left Vitthal Rao irrepressible as ever. About this time, he worked most enthusiastically at a scheme to establish a power loom factory as a joint stock concern at Bangalore. He took great pains to collect all the necessary statistics and data, and even the articles of association was drawn up, but the scheme fell through for lack of sufficient encouragement and response from the local capitalists. The writer had, at this time, the good fortune to stay with Vitthal Rao for his college course, and had therefore the privilege and opportunity to come into close and intimate contact with him. The nights, especially the only time when Vitthal Rao relaxed a little from his duties of the day, he would devote to reading light or serious literature. Vitthal Rao would be in his element, especially when his brother Sitaram Rao or Dr. Umanath Rao were also in his company. On such occasions, their talks would often prolong into late hours, Sometimes his father too would join his son's company, and there would be no end to the gaiety of the movement. For us youngsters, these talks were a rare treat. The discussion would be of absorbing interest and cover wide field from the sacred to the mundane. Politics was the talk of the day. Mahatma Gandhi had just then assumed the reins of the Congress, and his non-cooperation movement had galvanized overnight, as it were, the political life of India. His message of Charkha and Qadar echoed and re-echoed throughout the length and breadth of Hindustan. Like Sitaram Rao and Umanath Rao, Vitthal Rao too was an ardent nationalist. He became a great admirer of Gandhiji and took to wearing Qadar. Sometimes the discussion would turn upon such learned subjects as the tragedies of Shakespeare or the words of poet Milton, Byron, Keats, Shelley. In all these discussions, Vitthal Rao was quite at home and could hold his own against any other scholar. Often the talks would assume a higher, lighter vein, and one would come across rare flashes of wit and humor. Sometimes he would narrate an anecdote or a story, be it from some humorous writer like Jacob or from his own life, but his presentation was so provokingly funny and unique that the house would resound with peals of laughter from his listeners. Occasionally, his cousin Mark Sanjeev Rao would drop in for a friendly chat. Sanjeev Rao, who was a convert to Christianity and a sincere and zealous missionary at that, would try his best to impress Vitthal Rao with the superiority of his own faith. But Vitthal Rao, always eager for an intellectual bout, would vehemently argue for the other side, and the discussion at times drag on for hours. In the end, they would part as good friends as ever, but each unconvinced of the other's point of view, as at the start of the discussion, and neither any the wiser. No one who saw or heard Vitthal Rao in those days, in those carefree and ebullient moods, would scarce have guessed that there, under all this boyish cheerfulness and laughter, ran a streak of genuine anxiety for the business. The secret of it was that even in those days, Vitthal Rao had the great gift of looking at things with a detached spirit and shaking off, for the time being, all cares and worries as if they were never meant for him. His motto appeared to be to live in the living present and let God take care of the morrow. On the one hand, the financial condition of the business concern was drifting from bad to worse. On the other, Vitthal Rao's domestic life was none too happy. His wife Rukmabai had become a chronic asthmatic patient and was now almost an invalid. As observed in an earlier chapter, she was a strong-willed lady with an orthodox outlook, while her husband was modern in the sense that he refused to subscribe or submit to the superannuated notions of religion and religious life and the abounding bigotry and superstition with which they were surrounded. He was severe and outspoken in his condemnation of orthodoxy, especially the ritualism, and he had little patience with the pampered priestly order who fostered. Although Rukmabai's love and respect for her husband would ultimately make her yield to his viewpoint, it was not without a painful clash between them. Vitthal Rao was very much attached to his only child Ramabai, then 7-year-old, as much as she was to him. He centered all his love and affection on his daughter. He would take her to school every morning and escort her back in the afternoon. He would join her in her games and patiently answer all the questions that childish fancy or curiosity prompted her to put to him, and she would be his constant companion during his leisure hours. Yet, very soon, a time was to come when this excessive love for his only child was to be wiped out completely by the universal vision that he had, and his child was to be to him in no sense different from the other children that came to him. But slowly and imperceptibly, The external circumstances were helping Vitthal Rao's religious inclination to become deeper and his spirit of dispassion to gain an added strength and impetus. Every evening, he spent an hour at the house of Sitaram Rao, whose children would be engaged in bhajan before the image of Lord Krishna. During the bhajan, Vitthal Rao would lose himself in a blissful state of self-forgetfulness. Yesterday we were discussing that it is time for all of us to make some resolves. And many had the doubt where to begin. When we go through his life, in spite of the fact that he was very close to his daughter, in spite of the fact that his commitment for the business was there, still he had a knack of withdrawing himself. And he was very much with the household. He now commenced reading. That's why we remembered. We commenced reading. He now commenced reading afresh the lofty teachings of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, the works of Swami Vivekananda and Swami Ramthirtha, as well as other religious books like the Yogavaasisstha, with an intense interest. These works seemed now to unveil to him a deeper meaning and significance than they ever did before, and had the effect of accelerating the speed of the spiritual evolution that was subtly taking place within him. So, bhajan, swadhyay. It was at this time that Vitthal Rao started chanting the Lord's name of Rama. And the repetition of the name brought him great mental peace and joy. He was still Vitthal Rao. He kept up a ceaseless flow of the blessed name on his tongue, and its humming sound would automatically issue from his lips even when he was at work or walking in the streets. The affairs of Sitaram Vitthal Company. So now we find, though he was passing through severest stress, he was blessed to have a mindset where he would enjoy bhajans, not merely attending bhajans, where he will forget himself and then taking up intensely, not a casual reading, of the great works of Swami Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, Swami Ramthirtha, Swami Ramthirtha, Yogavaasisstha. Yogavaasisstha is the toughest book. And along with that, now, chanting of Nama. A proper mental background has been set by God, Before he started chanting Ram Nam, a proper mental setup has been made ready. Even without his knowing. The affairs of Sitaram Vitthal Company was plunging deeper and deeper into the quagmire of financial liabilities. Creditors all around were pressing Vitthal Rao for settlement of their dues. It seemed that only Providence could rescue him now from the impending crash and disaster. But the Lord's mercy is proverbial, and His works in a mysterious manner. His wonders to perform. Has not the Lord held forth the divine assurance in the Gita, to those men who worship me alone, thinking of no other, to those ever harmonious, I bring full security. And have we not read of innumerable instances in the lives of our great saints, sages and saviors? How repeatedly he ran to the succor of his devotees in distress. Even so, he came to Vitthal Rao's rescue in a most wonderful way, at a time when everything was past all hope and only a miracle could save off the utter ruin. One day a gentleman came to see Vitthal Rao at his house where he was carrying on his dying work. This gentleman was a well-to-do lawyer of Mangalore and had only recently given up his practice in answer to Mahatmaji's call to boycott the law courts. He took a sudden liking for Vitthal Rao, and before their talk had proceeded, he offered to join him as a partner in his business. Vitthal Rao placed before him a true and complete picture of the company's state of affairs, and frankly told him that to join the business at this juncture was tantamount to sharing the deep hole that he himself was then in. But the friend was not to be dissuaded, and he made immediate arrangements to become a partner in the firm. Besides liquidating all the company's liabilities, he invested a pretty big sum in erecting 40 handlooms for the manufacture of khatar. Later on, he erected a shed also to house those looms. From the time he came in as a partner, he was looking after the business at the shop, and Vitthal Rao was managing the handloom establishment. But things for Vitthal Rao were moving rather fast. Although his new partner was all kindness and saw to it that Vitthal Rao's household did not lack anything, Vitthal Rao's mind was from day to day running fast in the direction of God. The Lord's name was continuously working on his tongue. He gave up the night meal and other petty comforts of the body. His sadhana evoked remonstrance all around. He started spending the greater part of the nights in the repetition of the name. Rukmabai became thoroughly frightened at the strange turn her husband's life was rapidly taking now. No persuasion, appeal, protest, either from her or from the child, could induce him to alter the course he was now made to follow. For he felt very strongly that he was set upon his path by that highest power which he was struggling to attain and realize. So the company was sinking. Somebody comes forward and not only promised, he actually became a partner, invested a lot of money. So if we were in Papa's position, we would have immediately thanked God and carried on with it. No? He was straightforward. Even at the time when the friend came forward, he told him the pitiable state in which the company was. But still, the other person invested, became a partner. But that did not in any way affect his priorities for Godward path. Resolves, yesterday we were telling about resolves. Just think about it now. Is bhakti towards the Lord, no? Every day it was gaining momentum. He says, no persuasion, appeal or protest either from her or from his child could induce him to alter the course he was now made to follow. What a firm resolve, no? Because he felt very strongly that he was set upon his path by that highest power which he was struggling to attain and realize. So he was very clear as to what is to be attained. And whatever he was doing it as a part of sadhana was mainly intended for to realize that goal. He was very clear. He was very clear about the goal to be scaled. He was very clear about the prerequisites. He was very clear about the methodology. In spite of the fact that nobody was encouraging him. Not only that nobody was encouraging, everybody was discouraging, The critical period in Vitthal Rao's life and the psychological struggle he was now undergoing have been so beautifully described by him in his later great work, In Quest of God. Papa says, it was a period of terrible stress and restlessness, all of his own making. In this utterly helpless condition, full of misery, where was relief, where was rest? This was the heart's cry of Ramdas. Previously, when we were reading, we were thinking that this misery was caused by the loss in the business or social, or the so many tensions, he was carrying on because of wife's illness. It was not. I am not achieving. Yeah, the business has been partially now taken over by the other person. And he was also taking care to see that the household requirements are met with. So there was no struggle on that. So what is the struggle then? Struggle was only because the mind. The struggle was of the mind to get concentrated on the goal to be scaled. So he says it was a period of terrible stress and restlessness, all of his own making. In this utterly helpless condition, full of misery, where was relief, where was rest? This was the heart's cry of Ramdas. The cry was heard, and from the great void came the voice, despair not, trust me, thou shalt be free. And this was the voice of Ram. So it would be worthwhile for us to take a peep into the rigorous life of sadhana that Vitthal Rao now led. As days passed by, his life became more and more severely simple and ascetic. He had already discarded the use of his coat, and his apparel now consisted of a piece of dhoti, 4 cubits long, carelessly wound round his body, a loose collarless shirt, and a white cap, all made of coarse, hand-spun khatar. On account of severe reduction and change in his diet, he had grown very pale and lean. He walked in the streets with his eyes straight ahead and distant looking. If any friend or relation met him on the road, the farmer had to stop him to talk to him. But Vitthal Rao talked very little, and that too only when absolutely necessary. He would just smile, and only the slow, sweet, rhythmic humming sound of Sri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram would issue from his lips. He would move about his work in an absorbed state of mental ecstasy. On one occasion, when he was sitting in his room, repeating the mantram at night, his brother-in-law, who was on a very friendly and intimate terms with him, came with the intention of advising Vitthal Rao to give up his strange way of living, as it was causing pain to his dear ones and relations. As he stepped into the room, Vitthal Rao sensed the mission on which he had come, and with emphatic determination addressed him thus: Look here, I will go on repeating the mantram so incessantly and to such an intense degree as to make these very walls resound with its echo. The friend who was just opening his mouth to frame the words of his protest was simply taken aback at Vitthal Rao's ringing words. He thought that discretion was the better part of the valor, and jumping out of the room, disappeared precipitately. Instead of retarding the pace of Vitthal Rao's sadhana, the brother-in-law's visit only helped to inflame it and speed it on. Vitthal Rao would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and run to the Kadri hill. There in one of the tanks, he would have his bath, and after bath he would go to an elevated rock and sit down for meditation till about 7. Later he gave up his midday meals. He now subsisted entirely on boiled potatoes and fruit, and these two he would eat only when he felt hungry. He had before this given up the use of his dentures. He bathed in cold water drawn out of the well by himself and washed his own clothes. A bare mat sufficed for lying down, but he kept himself awake the whole night in repetition of the mantra. It may be that Vitthal Rao was entirely without sleep for 6 months. Consecutively. And the Lord's name never left his lips even for a moment during this period. Vitthal Rao would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, run to the Kadri hill. There in one of the tanks he would have his bath, and after bath he would go to an elevated rock and sit down for meditation till about 7. Later he gave up even his midday meal. He now subsisted entirely on boiled potatoes and fruit, and these two he would eat only when he felt hungry. He had before this given up the use of his dentures. He bathed in cold water, drawn out of the well by himself, washed his own clothes. A bare mat sufficed for lying down, but he himself kept awake the whole night in repetition of the mantram. It may be that Vitthal Rao was entirely without sleep for 6 months consecutively, and the Lord's name never left his lips even for a moment during this period. The news that Vitthal Rao was becoming perfectly unworldly and indifferent to his household affairs soon spread among his relations, caused them no little concern. One day his eldest sister, Lakshmi Devi, was induced by some of his relations to offer some sweets to Vitthal Rao. Both Vitthal Rao and Lakshmi Devi had grown up together, and between them there was a strong bond of mutual love and regard. These people were therefore led to think that if she should offer anything to her brother, he would not, out of regard for her, refuse to comply with her wishes. But Vitthal Rao was adamant in his resolve. And refused to accept the proffered seats. Finding all their protests and pleadings of little avail, both Ramabai and her mother Rukmabai adopted the same course of diet as Vitthal Rao followed. Vitthal Rao advised them to desist, but they continued to have it for a month or two, when at last they found it necessary to return to normal food. Commenting on this period of Vitthal Rao's life, his brother Sanjeev Rao writes, I used to visit Canada once every 2 or 3 years. During my visits, I would stay for a few days with my brothers. During my stay with brother Sitaram Rao in Mangalore, I was told that brother Vitthal Rao, who had been managing a weaving establishment in Mangalore for another gentleman, had developed an intense disgust for the world. I went and saw him. I found him wearing coarse khadar, and the bench he was sitting on at the time of my visit was strewn with religious books, amongst which I remember having seen the works of Swami Ramthirtha. My talk with him told me that he was not going to remain long in Mangalore, and that because he was under an obligation to his partner, he had to continue there for some time longer. What exactly he intended to do after fulfilling his part of the obligation, he did not inform me. A couple of days after my visit to him, he happened to come one night to Sitaram Rao's house, along with Dr. Umanatha Rao. Mahatma Gandhi became the topic of the conversation. There was some discussion about the impracticability of passive resistance, satyagraha, as preached by the Mahatma. In the course of the conversation, Vitthal Rao remarked, these fetters are galling, why not I snap them? At once my other brother met his remark vehemently with an exposition of the duties of a householder, as he understood them, and how it would be covered is to shed them. This did not at all convince Vitthal Rao. Soon after his discussion, Dr. Umanatha Rao and himself left. That night, reviewing the conversation, it struck me that Vitthal Rao was in dead earnest when he declared his intention of snapping the bonds. I expressed my fear regarding the subject to Sitaram Rao, who just foo-fooed the whole matter, adding how even when things were considerably less bright, Vitthal Rao had not thought of giving up the world. His assurance did not satisfy me. After my return to Ernakulam, I had news from time to time of how, like a sannyasin, Vitthal Rao was living, first reducing the meals from 2 to 1, later giving up that also, living on boiled potatoes. Naturally, this self-denial on his part brought great anxiety to his relations, for he was adamant in spite of protests and persuasions from all quarters. At this juncture, I had a letter from father in which he asked me to write to Vitthal Rao and persuade him to break his fast and take 2 meals. I wrote, urging that due to dear father's old age, he should not go on with the fast. My letter brought a prompt but brief reply. It said that since he began the fast, he felt, if anything better than before, he was trying it as an experiment. The letter ended with a statement that he had realized the hollowness of life. I did not pursue the matter as I knew it was useless. Towards the final plunge. Even in the intense state of detachment and sadhana described in the last chapter, Vitthal Rao was attending to all the duties pertaining to the weaving establishment with meticulous care. Even so, The vision of the universal life was slowly dawning upon him. Consequently, he had become extremely kind, charitable, forgiving toward the workmen serving under him. He freely moved with them, treated them as equals. This equality of treatment meted out to the workers one day evoked a burst of vehement protest from Sitaram Rao, only to be brushed aside with a sweet and gentle smile from Vitthal Rao. He felt a comradeship with all living beings and was swept away by compassion for all those who suffered. He now also became highly sensitive to the pain and suffering of others and felt as if he himself was experiencing all the pains and sorrows which others were undergoing. How Ram was slowly opening up the universal vision. No? Before the plunge, we should know that. One evening, as Vitthal Rao was passing along the road leading to the Kadri hill, he met a bullock. As he neared the cart, he found the cartman was mercilessly beating the bullocks to induce them to go faster. Vitthal Rao could not bear the sight. He actually seemed to feel the smarting pain of the blow every time the cartman heavily laid the lash on the bullocks' backs. With a loud cry, he begged the cartman not to beat the poor, dumb creatures, but the cartman heeded not. So before another blow was dealt, Vitthal Rao ran away from the painful scene as fast as he could. At home, he would advise his wife and daughter not to injure or cause any harm to even the tiniest of God's creatures, however disagreeable they might be. This paternal advice made such a deep and abiding impression on Ramabai that even to this day she tries to carry out her father's precept literally. At about this time, an acquaintance of Vitthal Rao in the town fell seriously ill. His was an advanced case of tuberculosis, and he was considered to be past all medical aid. Vitthal Rao would repair to the house of the ailing friend every evening, spend the night at his bedside, cheering the sick man with his company and ministrations. This labor of love he continued until the friend breathed his last. Now and again, Vitthal Rao would feel a vague intuition that he was very soon to renounce everything and be altogether God's own. One day when he had gone to the town to see his partner friend, he gave expression to his urge to kick up everything and go away somewhere. When the friend heard this, he was all these days watching the trend of Vitthal Rao's life with considerable anxiety and misgiving. He displayed a frightened look and cried out, "If you go away, you will only be leaving me destitute on the roadside." But this remark of protest left Vitthal Rao's mind unaffected, because he knew that his life had become a plaything in the hands of the Almighty to be shaped and molded as He alone willed. Slowly, the idea of renouncing everything and getting away from his present environment was gathering momentum. He knew not yet what course this step on his part would take and how and when it would finally take shape. All that he knew was that the hour of the supreme call to give up everything that he called his own in this world and make the final plunge into the infinite would not be long delayed. It was to be a daring leap into the mystic unknown and called for tremendous courage to take it. But it was a leap actuated by the same great power and as had placed the divine mantra on his lips and turned his vision towards it, and Vitthal Rao was all ready and eager for the grand adventure when the supreme hour struck. An adventure that meant untold suffering and mortification of the body. In the language of the mystics, it was to be an adventure to storm the very city of God and win eternal freedom. What a long preparation. No? It was not out of a sudden impulse. How many days, how many weeks, how many months, how many years God made him to step by step recede from the various fields. Number one. Number two, to get grounded in the gold. Now we realize, what are we doing, Are we really in search of Him, in quest of Him? What all preparations, what all prerequisites are there? And especially he was a householder. And as we said earlier, he did not get any encouragement from anybody, Only God was his support. So now we can understand why he was leaning on God more and more. Within. Otherwise, how will he get that courage? No, it was the 0 hour for Vitthal Rao's life. The supreme moment towards which his life during these last 2 years was slowly but inexorably moving itself for ultimate fulfillment. The hour of destiny had at last arrived, when he was to break asunder all the shackles that still bound him to the worldly life and cast himself entirely and absolutely on divine mercy in the great venture on which he was to sally forth in pursuit of the vision of the life universal. It was the momentous time when he was to cut himself away from all the moorings that held him to this world and set his tiny boat sailing in the infinite expanse of the divine ocean, seemingly without a rudder or a chart or a compass, daring the very storms and tempests that would ceaselessly assail him and try to crush his spirit. But Vitthal Rao was fortified in the knowledge that it was the divine pilot who was guiding his little boat into the unknown and uncharted seas. Where then was the need for any fear, or were any need for anxiety? Beautiful. But Vitthal Rao was fortified in the knowledge that it was the divine pilot who was guiding his little boat into the unknown and uncharted seas. Where then was the need for any fear, or were any need for anxiety? This is how Swamiji describes. So one night, while engaged in drinking the sweetness of his name, Ramdas was made to think in the following strain. O Ram, when thy slave finds thee, at once so powerful and so loving, and he who trusts thee can be sure of true peace and happiness, why should he not throw himself entirely on thy mercy, which can be possible only by giving up everything he called mine? Thou art all in all to thy slave. Thou art the sole protector in the world. Men are deluded when they declare, I do this, I do that, this is mine, that is mine. All, O Ram, is thine. All things are done by thee alone. Thy slave's one prayer to thee is to take him under thy complete guidance and remove the I-ness in him. This prayer was heard. Ramdas's heart heaved a heavy sigh, a hazy desire to renounce all and wander in the garb of a mendicant in quest of Ram now wafted over his mind. And now the next para is very, very touching, but very nice also, because he is slowly now zeroing to that particular hour. The very Ram to whom he was praying for deliverance from worldly bondage now conspired with his devotee. This is very important. To make it easier for him to get away from worldly life. Just then it so happened that both his wife and daughter were invited to stay for a couple of days at the farmer's father's house in the town and were away from the home. Seizing this valuable opportunity, Vitthal Rao, without anybody's knowledge, purchased a small quantity of red ochre and coming home dyed 2 of his 4 khadar clothes into that sacred color. The same night he wrote 2 letters, one to his wife, whom he, as he describes, Ram had made him look upon for some time past as his sister, and the other to his friend, his partner in the business. It may be mentioned here that true to her husband's parting behest, Rukmabai made the spinning wheel, because he said, don't give up the spinning wheel. That letter also is good. Dear sister, you are to me only a sister in future. Sri Ram, at whose feet I have surrendered myself entirely, has called me away from the past sphere of my life. I go forth, a beggar into the wide world, chanting the sweet name of Ram. You know, I have no ambition in life except to struggle for the attainment of Sri Ram's grace and love. To that aim, to that alone, I dedicate the rest of my life and suffer for it, suffer to any extent. We may not meet again, at least as husband and wife. Walk always in the path of God and truth, and make Rame do the same. Don't give up spinning wheel. It will give you peace and happiness. Let Rame also work it. Sri Ram's blessings be upon you and Rame. He protects you both. Vitthal Rao. It may be mentioned here that true to her husband's parting behest, Rukmabai made the spinning wheel her constant companion and the source of her comfort, peace and happiness almost till her very last day. To quote Swamiji's words again, Papa's words again, the resolution was made at 5 o'clock in the morning. Ramdas bade farewell to a world for which he had lost all attraction, in which he could find nothing to call his own. the body, the mind and the soul, all laid at the feet of Ram. That eternal being, full of love, full of mercy. Thus, on the 27th December 1922, in his 38th year, Vitthal Rao turned his back on worldly life, to which he was never more to return. Then the saga starts from In Quest of God. Now, all of us have fairly a good idea about the 2-year struggle, no? And how he was able to, you lost your connection. So when Papa left everything, you lost your network connection.
One thought when that person came to take her as a partner, but did not doubt. Otherwise, anybody would doubt when the business is already in a sinking shape. Why this person is coming? We would have doubted. Why is he coming? There was no doubt with it. He accepted that also as a will. The directive from God.
Swami, that is the thing of Rama, or it is a Maya to again Vitthal Rao going back to normal world.
Everyone's life has been designed by him. So he allowed Papa to function as Vitthal Rao for some time. When the appointed time came, Ram made slowly the outer circumstances to shape in such a way that he receded from it gradually, and at the exact moment he was able to cut. It was all the working of Ram. We need not think from the individual level. It is humanly not possible. No? The way in which he has been narrating, anybody in his position would have compromised at many, many stages. But it was the working of Ram. He is drafted for this purpose. So how can he be limited to a family? So he gave him all what is needed, the firm conviction, fixed resolve, sustaining faith, optimistic outlook. This is what he used to say one should have. 6 months. Just imagine. It was a blend of bhakti and jnana. It was not purely jnana, not the usual purely understood bhakti, but it was a harmonious blend of bhakti and jnana. And that is why he later said, even before he started his Parivrajaka Yatra, in quest of God, he had attained the goal.
Swamiji, it was very thoughtful of you to take up this at this juncture. So we still have time. So a repair can be done.
Can you hear?
Hari Om. You are able to hear, no?
Yeah, we can hear now.
Can you hear?
You were hearing? Towards the final plunge, you were able to hear? No. We'll take it up tomorrow again. Some problem with the internet. We were not looking at the laptop at all. We were immersed in the... So we don't know at what time, where we got disconnected. So one thing is becoming very clear to all of us, the 2 years of struggle. It was not an ordinary struggle, no? It was a struggle that made him to prepare, made him to make a very firm commitment, where everything else became secondary for him. Concentrating only on this, prioritizing only on this.
Pardon? Will you please repeat it, the question?
Tomorrow we'll... No?
The friend, when the help came, why he did not accept, and then
He accepted it, no?
he says he must have thought he was there.
He accepted.
He accepted the help, but still Papa was very clear what is his goal. That's what Swamiji says.
The purpose of reading is, we are trying to understand the struggle he had. We are all chanting Ram Nam for decades now. But he was also chanting. And his chanting helped him to move faster to the goal. So we were trying to find out what else he practiced. Then we found that before chanting, he was slowly, God was preparing him to go through some of the works. Eh? Anyway, for them we will just come. So because of this internet trouble, tomorrow we will take it up again. You know?
Hari Om. Hari Om. They are all talking themselves. Hari Om.
Anyway, Hari Om for everybody.
They are not able.
Eh?
They are talking among themselves. I'll close it actually. They are finding themselves.
Here we can address them also, no?
Yes.
So we will tomorrow again take up. In the meantime, kindly do some thinking, no? We are getting more and more clear about the Vitthal Rao, the sadhaka. Six months without sleep, chanting with so many self-denials. What are we and where are we? No? That is why very often he prompts us to say these words. Start from where he started, not start from where he ended. We will never get the picture, you know. We may not be able to do anything what has been described, what he went through for 2 years. But after listening to that, there could be something. We may not have any idea. There could be something. That would help us to move forward. For which, of course, we have to do the churning. So even we were under the impression that after he came back from the first global for Inquest of God tour, he went to Kadri Hill. But now it is clear, as Vitthal Rao also, he was going to Kadri Hill. And taking a dip in the cold water, washing his clothes, and sitting on a rock for 3 hours spent on meditation. Self-denial, chanting, meditation. Disinterestedness in both family affairs and business affairs. And then, as Chandrasekhar Rao puts it, God also conspired, arranged a day for them. Suppose they were there, it would have been difficult for him. We feel it must have been the Madras mail, which on those days leaves at about 5 o'clock or 5:30 in the morning. And then it reached Erode by evening, night. With no plans. Hari Om. We will take it up again tomorrow. 2-3 days we will think about it more and more. So that on 16th, when we go to his Jayanti, our heart will be full of not the royal papa that we have when we see his photo, But the journey from Vitthal Rao to Papa, that we will be able to mentally bring and then prostrate before him and seek. He is now in the form of remembrance in all our hearts. So we can seek his grace. You know our limitations, you know our equipment. So suiting to this equipment and limitation, kindly prescribe a formula by which we also attain what we have attained. Though not in this birth, at least in the next birth. Some sort of a prayer also will well up. Hari Om. Om Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram Om Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram Om